Hello, Suzanne. Can you hear me?
Greetings, yes.
All right, so we'll wait a couple minutes here before we get moving.
I know a couple of people are not able to be here. Jarnio is on a bus, so it might be a small crowd, but I think it's very useful. This information is so incredibly rich and relevant, and it really is not easy to break into it. If we can kind of set the stage, I sent you some slides, and also I made a Google Sheet that lists the 63 points that ACA collected in their report to the president, in their second report to the president. Going
63 points. That's incredible.
It is
You say
incredible.
you say you sent this to me. I'm not seeing anything from you.
Oh, I sent it as a message with an X.
Oh, all right. That's different. Let's see what you got. Okay. Any possibility of shooting that over as an email as well?
Sure. Give me a second here.
Okay. It may well be. I think we should get started regardless. And
I actually think it's not a bad idea that you and I walk through this together.
no,
And
I don't think it's a bad idea. I'm all good with it. I think what we ought to do, though, given that this is being recorded, is talk a little bit about the context of what we're about to talk about today. And of course, by the way, this is my name is John Richardson, and I'm speaking with Dr. Suzanne de Treville in Switzerland. I'm in Canada. And we are talking today about a very interesting publication that came out in 1980. It's called U.S. Law Affecting Americans Living and Working Abroad. And it's actually a report from former President Jimmy Carter to the Committee on Foreign Relations, the United States Senate. And how it came about, reading from the back of the book, it says a legislative effort by Senator George McGovern required the president to conduct a thorough study of laws governing U.S. citizens abroad. This report by President Carter was the first under that law, a painstaking review of the many legal provisions affecting U.S. citizens residing abroad. Issues include loss of citizenship by children born abroad, income tax, Social Security, veterans benefits, and many other matters, and very little has changed since the report was written. So there's still a valuable legal guide for any American taking up foreign employment or residence. Actually, I'm not sure when the back cover of this book was written. Let's see if there's a copyright on this. If it even can be copyrighted. Well, okay, so it says copyright 2001. And well, I mean, it's pretty clear that a lot has in fact changed since 2001, and absolutely nothing has changed for the better, I think.
mm-hmm.
You know, I would say that things are far worse than they were. Would you agree, Suzanne?
I agree. Yes, I totally agree. And going through some of this material in detail is absolutely terrifying, because it hits so close to home. When I think about some of the discussions that we've had in this community writ large, it's eerie to think that all of this started 49 years ago, and here we are in 2025, having gone substantially backward.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that things are actually worse. And, you know, of course, we'll talk about that. Now, I've just received your slides. So there's 25 total slides.
That's
And This is, I mean, it looks as thorough and meticulous as I would expect from you.
Well, these are ugly. Normally, I like for my slides to be a bit more beautiful, but this report is ugly and it's very, very hard to work through, very hard to digest. So what I decided to do was just make screenshots of the material, because once you're able to connect with the language, it is incredibly powerful and gave a huge number of insights. John, the second thing that I sent you was a link to a Google Sheet that has a list of the issues. So see if you're able to open that, because
Okay.
this is kind of this will get your attention.
All right. Let's see here. So you just sent that to me by email as well, correct?
Yeah, the two links are in the email.
Okay. Let's see what we got here. I'm only seeing one email from you with, are these two separate Google Docs? Oh, they are.
Yes.
Ah, so that's what's going on here. Oh, yeah. Okay. This is a spreadsheet. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I saw somebody arrive. So what I suggest is that we make links to these available to everybody who wants to hear this recording. And
Absolutely.
can
Well, what I
follow.
will do, as you know, I put these on the Substack, and I'll include the links. Okay.
Perfect.
Along with the
And I would
recording.
encourage people to have to follow the slides, as we walk through, because there's a lot of material here.
Okay. Can I ask you before we go over this, precisely because it is a lot of material? If you had, 2 minutes as sort of a closing statement, to summarize what it is and what you think it means and how it bears on, the crusade, the mission, if you will, to try to get tax reform for Americans abroad, what would your sort of bottom line answer be?
So that is an extremely rich question. And I would actually like to suggest that this be an intro space, and that we would then organize a second space to discuss that question. And I'd love to have some people like Brent and Giornio, Brad, and
All right, done. We'll do that. We'll make that our next space, then the follow up from this one.
Because my personal view is that, having worked through this material, it provides for me a lot of insight into what is possible, but also what it's going to take to get there. And I think it also creates a lot of space for working together. I think that if all of us, if all of the groups work together, agree to differ on some points, but agree on the principal things, and then we just make sure that we are well represented in Washington in every different direction. I think we can take this one home, but I think it's going to take every single one of us, every single different viewpoint, every single like each one of us has certain people that we can go and like communicate with, negotiate with, and they all have got to be involved. Because one thing that I think comes out of this material is the quite unbelievable ability of the U.S. government to show inertia. So that's kind of I found that very sobering.
So I would sort of summarize that as saying all hands need to be on deck and all hands need to be respected.
Yes.
Okay.
And there is enough work here. Everybody gets the credit.
Well, that, of course, has been and continues to be at least this is my perception, has been and continues to be a huge problem. Okay. As I believe it was President Reagan, had on his desk a sign that said, we can accomplish anything if we don't care who gets the credit.
I love that. I've never heard that before. I love that. Okay.
Does that mean you're a Democrat, Suzanne? I'm only kidding.
The scary thing is that the first argument with my husband was I was actually a Reagan supporter. I grew up Republican. And so that, and here I am, married to a European,
Oh my
and
God.
and he's like, I love you madly and passionately, but you're a Reagan supporter. Now, we fast forward, going on 40 years, and he has a lot more appreciation for Reagan than he did 40 years ago. And
Well, Reagan was, I think a truly great president. I mean, regardless of, whether you're Republican or Democrat. I don't even think these things mean the same things as they did then, Republican, Democrat. But,
totally not.
Reagan had the ability, I think largely to, get the best out of people around him. And one of the things that was interesting about the Reagan tax reform in 1986 was that he didn't make it a Republican thing at all. Like he brought everybody into this. And that was why it turned out to be a success, right? It wasn't like the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, where is widely perceived, and I think probably true, that the Republicans just used their political majority to ram this thing through. That was not what happened in 1986, where, people from all across the spectrum, were invited to contribute to this. And I'm not saying that, the tax reform was good or anything like that. I think like all these things, it had goodness and badness in it. But what it did have was, I think, a political legitimacy to it that, clearly is a big part of the problem today. Just looking at, what I've kind of appreciate over the last 10, 15 years is that to understand a country, all you need to do is understand the tax system. That's it. Everything else is just, a specific example of some principle in there. And
it tells you an amazing amount about what matters and what the issues really are.
Oh, it surely does. It surely does. And, for listeners, I would recommend that incredible book by the late Charles Adams, Taxes and Civilization. It's the type of thing where if you saw it initially, you'd think, what in the world could this crazy thought really be? But, when you really understand it, he's absolutely right. So, why does this matter? Well, coming back to, we can accomplish anything if we don't care who gets the credit. I think that the first step is to, get some of the people or groups who want to be seen as having the credit, maybe to back off, a little bit.
I think that might be, I think we can return to that at the end of doing a first pass at looking at this material, because one of the things that amazes me is the incredible amount of really great work that people are putting into this and have been putting into this. And there's such a temptation, until you stumble into the problems that arise from US taxation, you just don't realize how bad it is. But then it seems like, the current initiatives start from now. And so, going back and looking at this report from 1979, and the fact that we are still fighting the same battle, and it's pretty much the same people, the same organizations, shows me that we really need to join forces, and that if we do join forces, there is amazingly good stuff to be insisting on.
Yeah, I think that is true. Well, okay, so moving into what was happening in 1980. Oh my God, hard to believe, graduating from law school, if you can imagine. Oh my God. What were you doing in 1980?
What was I doing in 1980? I graduated from business school, and I was having a real job before realizing I wanted to be a professor.
Say again?
I was about to start my doctorate.
Oh my God.
I'm just about to start my doctorate. That was a very different world.
It was a very different world. Absolutely. Incredibly different. But, my mother's in her 90s, and, she said to me, one of the last times I spoke with her, she said, John, I'm now in my 90s, and really not much has changed in my life. Which I thought was kind of an interesting observation, right?
That is a fascinating observation.
You
That is
know,
an
meaning that the same issues of basic human nature, right? Seem to be driving this stuff. I mean, the words used to describe the issues might be different, but
Well, I think that your mother would appreciate, this report by ACA, and she would say, "John, you see, I told you." Uh,
not much
so
has changed.
not much has changed, unfortunately. But John, it is time to change it. We need to change it.
Well,
It is
and that is why that was your destiny, Suzanne. I mean, you might have thought that it was to be a professor or, all this stuff that I understand you do, but no, 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 that was not the reason you were born. The reason you were born was to work on this problem.
it's terrifying. Like once you get into it, it is absolutely, it is surprisingly fascinating.
Well,
You
tell me
know,
about the report. Tell me about the report.
all right. So that we have quite a path here, and I've entitled this slide presentation "From the ACA Report to Section 611 Public Law 95-426 as amended by Section 407 Public Law 9660." So a little bit of history. So back in 1976, the Tax Reform Act was passed, and this caused a fair amount of discomfort for expats because it went from foreign earned income being treated quite favorably to uh, there was no longer an exclusion for foreign earned income. It was replaced with a deduction, and the deduction didn't do very. It did, of course, did substantially less. The tests of who was, eligible became stricter. They were more rigorously enforced. If there were benefits from an employer, they were no longer excluded. The reporting and the compliance burden increased, IRS scrutiny increased. Now, one thing that I found absolutely fascinating as I dug into this was I discovered that the law that gave US citizens abroad the right to vote was passed in 1975. And I actually asked ChatGPT, do these go together? Because just that I thought that timing was very interesting. And ChatGPT assured me that no, these were two completely separate acts, but they did demonstrate the fact that there was extra attention being paid. Like prior to 1976, people lived outside the US, but they weren't really paid very much attention. They kind of ceased to exist. But in 1976, the government said, there's there's some tax revenue there. And by the way, we just gave these people the right to vote. So I find the timing interesting. Another thing that I found absolutely fascinating was that this Tax Reform Act of 1976 also ended up creating a taxpayer ombudsman within the IRS that then evolved into the National Taxpayer Advocate in 1998. So I thought that was just quite intriguing. Now, so what happened was that expats who had been happily living their lives outside of the US were put in a very bad situation. So, US expats, especially in Switzerland and France, were outraged and they started a grassroots movement. Um, there were a lot of petitions, letters to Congress, and this is why the ACA was formed in 1978, and it was headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. And in 1978, the Foreign Earned Income Act was passed, and it made things a little bit better. Still much worse than things had been prior to 1976, but at least there was foreign earned income exclusion. So the fact that things got better and that the government was held back is directly recognized to have resulted from that advocacy. So I looked at this as being an example of what advocacy can do. So especially when you think about the fact that in 1978, there wasn't technology. You were writing letters and putting a stamp on them and mailing them, and maybe they eventually arrived.
Right. I just sent you a post that I wrote a couple of years ago on my Citizenship Solutions site that actually chronicles that history. There's a book about it called The Unknown Ambassadors, a saga of citizenship by Phyllis Michaud.
Oh, interesting.
Which I just sent over to you, that if you rethink any of this type of stuff, I think it might be worth reading that. And even the book itself actually is very, very interesting. But, when I read the Phyllis Michaud book, The Unknown Ambassadors, what really did strike me was that, and the reason that I wrote this up as a post actually was, to demonstrate that advocacy can matter.
Yeah.
If it's done properly. And, this is an example. Now, I think that Ms. Michaud I believe that ARROW as an organization predates ACA. And I think that she was, involved with ARROW. In any case, she was in Paris or in France in any case. So have a look at what I sent you. Her 1996 book is called The Unknown Ambassadors, a saga of citizenship.
Great. I might add that to these slides.
Yeah, I think you might want to add it. But one thing that is very, very different between if we think then and now was that, Ms. Michaud clearly believed that advocacy was possible because she believed in the fundamental goodness and fairness of the U.S. government generally, right? And I don't think that attitude exists today, which, may be a difference. I don't know. I don't think in 76, the U.S. government was openly hostile to Americans abroad.
Well, that's an interesting point. And one thing is that you can have people who are hostile and who are not being at their best. And true leadership is communicating in a way that causes individuals to realize that they can do better, and that they can seek to make the world a better place instead of only going for advantage. So that's when advocacy is at its best, when there is a true moral sense of this is right. If you think about, like objective morals, we might not know exactly what they are, but most people think that they exist. So if they exist, then that provides a lot of warrant to argue for something.
Well, Suzanne, let me ask you, is it your view that tax reform for Americans abroad is fundamentally a moral issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
There's a right way to treat people.
Yeah.
It's not right to treat people unfairly. It's not right to discriminate among people who should be treated in the same way. If you think about it, many of the people who are making decisions that are hostile to Americans abroad, if one of their kids moved to Japan or, Germany or wherever, and started running into these issues, their position would change very quickly. Or if they themselves ended up, in a relationship, they go on a vacation, they fall in love with somebody who's a non-American, and they end up making their life with them, and then suddenly these issues become a lot more salient.
Right. Yeah, no question about it.
That you the whole idea is to treat people the way that that you would like to be treated, and the way that expats are treated, um, nobody who thought that they might end up being an expat would treat expats the way they're treating them. So for me, this comes down to the absolute, fundamental nature of tax reform.
What do you think about the fact that there's this whole assumption or possible assumption through the years that anything to do with tax reform has to be revenue neutral. And for example, as I understand it, the LaHood bill is presently caught up in some committee to determine, what the cost of it would be to U.S. Treasury. I mean, what do you see, if any, the role between revenue neutrality and ending citizenship taxation to be?
Whew. Okay, nice small question.
I know.
So first of all, uh, if the reason why U.S. citizens are treated unfairly is because it produces some extra revenue in the short term. And this is extremely myopic. That's why one of the main points of the whole study in 1979 was, what is it costing the US in terms of competitiveness to have US citizens living abroad being treated so badly? And the answer is, it costs quite a bit. uh, so the whole idea of revenue neutrality is a um, very myopic concept. If we do what in my field we call systems thinking, where you think about the follow-on effects, you do this, and then something happens, and then something else happens. I am absolutely certain that if the U.S. were to simply stop double taxing non-U.S. income, that uh, they would have more money, because it costs so much money, uh, and it uses so many resources to try to collect the taxes from us. And then the majority of people don't owe any taxes at all. And it cuts down on investment. You have all these people who are wanting to renounce. By the way, one of the things that I find very interesting in the points that ACA raised in their report is that a large number of points concerned maintaining citizenship. And that was in the second category after taxation. Whereas now, if we were to write a similar report, we would have a large number of points about the right to renounce, and the renunciation process. And I think that that is a very sobering reality, that 50 years later, it's no, 50 years later, if you are not living in the US and have a strong reason to be able to go to the US for more than you can on an ESTA visa, then U.S. citizen makes you substantially worse off, and that is heartbreaking. Absolutely, absolutely heartbreaking. Um, so when I think back to what it was like in the '80s, and the idea, like being a U.S. citizen was magical. It was just absolutely wonderful. And there was a sense of, we can do things, we're going to put our head down, we're going to figure it out. Um, and so now, the idea is that hmm, uh, this, I'm, that we're in a bad situation, and renunciation is one way out, and that's really, really sad. And the people that we're losing are people that we shouldn't be losing.
Well, there's no question that in the 21st century, U.S. citizenship is a disability. And, this was predicted as early as, I remember reading this. It was in the early 2000s. I read a book written in 1996 by James Dale Davidson called The Sovereign Individual. And what I found fascinating years later was the 3 or 4 pages where he talked about this, and he even talked about specific provisions of the U.S. tax code that would make U.S. citizenship an absolute liability moving forward. And, if anything, he understated it. But, the reality, I know people don't like to hear this, but another Reaganism, actually, all of these were from somewhere else, but he perfected it. Facts are stubborn things. Facts are stubborn things. There you go, right?
Also, most things in life have a lot that's wrong with them, and then some things that are good with them. And I think that as we do the advocacy work, from Democrats Abroad to ACA to the Tax Fairness for Accidental Americans or Americans Abroad, to ARO, simulation, legal analysis, etc., then we kind of restrain the things that are the worst, and it's worth doing. No. So I don't think that we're going to create utopia, but I think that we can make things better, and we can agree that this is the right thing to do. It's worth doing. Now, back to the slides. One side note that I found fascinating from the ACA report is that in 1926, a decision was made to exclude all foreign earned income from U.S. taxation. It's not clear to me what happened with unearned income. I haven't had a chance to figure that out. But foreign earned income, it is very much like what we were hoping for with the napkin. That just, it's, foreign income. It's, it's been taxed by somebody else. We're not, U.S. isn't going to tax it. But then in 1962, a limitation on the foreign earned income that could be excluded was set because there had been abuse by a small number of high net worth individuals. And then in 1976, it followed by eliminating the foreign earned income exclusion altogether. But then it was restored in 1978. So I do find it quite interesting that 1926, it was like, we shouldn't be doing this. It's very close to residence-based taxation. But 1962, all it took was a small number of wealthy people. I think these were people from Hollywood who abused the system, and then there was a complete freak out. So one of the things that we've discussed a lot in the context of the LaHood bill is the safeguards against high net worth individuals being able to abuse the system. And that's really, really essential. It seems to me, if this is to go forward. So what happened was that there was, and by the way, all of this took place in the context of the oil crisis in 1974. So that oil crisis in 1974, where there was the dramatic rise in the price of oil, and then countries were suddenly realizing that they were going to need to be having much higher imports because of fuel prices. And so that meant that to maintain a trade balance, they were going to need to be exporting more. So there was suddenly a big emphasis on foreign trade, and the ability to export. So the ACA report does a very nice analysis of what Germany, Canada, France did, or Japan, in terms of making it easier for citizens of these countries to be living someplace else. And uh, and this included primarily tax policy and education policy. But at the same time, the US said, but oh, there are these people and they're abroad and they're US citizens. And so we need to be getting tax revenues. So there was just a very, very different reaction. Um,
And how do you account for that? Well, I
you
mean,
know, that is,
or try to account for it. I mean,
oh,
help me with this.
okay.
What kind of thinking can lead to this sort of, result that's so contrary to the interests of the country overall?
Okay, so I think that the way of thinking is the same as the way of thinking that uh, underlay the transfer of all U.S. manufacturing offshore. It's low cost thinking, where low cost is the only criterion that matters. And when you think specifically about tax revenue, or you think specifically about minimizing the per unit landed cost, you end up making some extremely bad decisions. And the fact that that the U.S. has been basically deindustrialized uh, is an absolute catastrophe for the country. It is so completely unnecessary. It would be possible to be manufacturing everything that needs to be manufactured extremely profitably. But this knee-jerk, low-cost reaction, which again, I'll use the word myopic, led to very bad decision making. And the knee jerk, oh, somebody might get away with not paying $1 in taxes. Um, this low cost thinking is going to lead to very bad, very, very bad decisions that are going to hurt people. That's how we end up with crazy things like, oh, well, there was a foreign exchange gain, so we need to tax it, even though the money, no currency was ever exchanged.
That is, that particular stuff is, ranks as among the most insane provisions of this whole thing, right?
But that is a dead giveaway to the fact that it's this, like low cost, or like just get me that tax revenue. And we find the same thing with penalties. Like just penalty as a revenue. Just go after getting that money.
So, but what you're saying, Suzanne, is that to some extent the U.S. stands almost alone in this kind of attitude. I mean, what I was inferring from what you were saying, that other countries behave differently.
Yeah, there is some element of that. There is an element of that in human nature, but there is a little bit more reflection.
Okay.
The
All right. So this is great. I mean, you're taking us through the signpost, if you will, of some of the history of this. So this is good stuff. Please continue with it.
Okay, so now what happened was that ACA submitted a first report on December 18th, 1978, raising 50 issues. And President Carter submitted a response to the ACA report to Congress August 27th, 1979. And then Congress requested an expanded version of the same report to also consider the impact of these issues on the competitiveness of U.S. citizens, not only the fact that it was discriminatory and unfair, but also that it was making the U.S. less competitive. And then what ACA did was to submit a second report on December 3rd, 1979, adding 13 more issues. They also responded to each of President Carter's responses, and they addressed the issue of competitiveness. So this is a real endurance exercise. So what I thought that it would be useful to do would be to go through some of these issues. And I really would like to give a shout out to the wording, the drafting of this report, and then also get ready for an emotional response, because seeing the fact this discussion took place in 1979 and we're still here is terrifying. By the way, just looking quickly at the Google Sheet. So what I have done is I transcribed the the 63 issues, and then with just a I just gave their title. And then I gave an X to them if they were under taxation, and 27 of the rows were related to taxation, so almost half.
All right, so this
And
is
then
your spreadsheet, okay, just to give this context. So
this is the spreadsheet, yeah.
this is
And
the spreadsheet, and you've got, why is this number 27 to 51?
because let me eliminate the filter, and then it'll be clearer what I'm doing here. Okay, so now you see.
I see. You were identifying the ones that were taxation only.
Exactly.
Got it.
And if I take, and you see that the first 26 are not related to taxation.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that.
So then when I filter them, then I remove the blanks in column C, and I remove there were a couple of question marks and blanks, and then what I have is 27 27 issues. By the way, one of the taxation related issues, it's not that it's no longer current, but in trying to relate this to US competitiveness, the point was just very weak. That's point 29, if I remember correctly.
Taxation of inadequate U.S. tax credit, that's what 29 is.
American tax practices impede the purchase of
Oh, I
US
see.
goods.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. Okay.
And that simply, I just thought that was not a very strong argument. And so if it ever was true, it's probably still current, but I didn't include it as one of the current ones.
Okay. So in summary, just make sure I've got this. Okay. These are issues that were identified back then. That's what you're saying, correct? All of these things?
Yes.
Okay. And your point is that, I can tell just at a glance that most of these continue on steroids, in fact.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
all right. Well, this is really, just to pause and reinforce this for a second. I think that this is incontrovertible evidence, okay, that these are not somehow new issues, that Americans abroad have suffered with this stuff forever, and that it's time to do something about this.
Well, John, I hope that you have had your coffee, your McDonald's coffee, because you're going to need it. So buckle your seatbelt, because here we go.
I have 2 of them this morning, Suzanne.
Good.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay. So one more thing I wanted to point out, just because it is pretty amazing. So what happened was that Congress actually passed a law to say, Section 611A, the Congress finds that United States citizens living abroad should be provided fair and equitable treatment by the United States government with regard to taxation, citizenship of progeny, veterans benefits, voting rights, social security benefits, and other obligations, rights, benefits. And statutes and regulations should be designed so as not to create competitive disadvantage for individual American citizens living abroad, working in international markets. I'm like, so we need a law to say that? Whatever it takes.
Well,
And
now
then
was this actually passed or was this proposed?
this was actually passed. This was passed.
You're positive of that?
I am, okay, when it comes to law,
You're as
I'm
positive as you can be. Okay.
pretty sure.
Okay.
But,
But the point is that somebody dreamt this up.
yes.
Okay.
And then not later, yes, this was passed. This was passed. I'm going to put it at 99% because with law, it's just amazing the things that you can be sure of. Like, remember the Moore case?
Absolutely.
Like, wait, language is not the same when it has anything to do with
No, law is designed to confuse the issue.
okay. So, and then Section B says, not later than January 20th, 1980, the president shall transmit to the Speaker of the House of Representatives and the Chairman of the Committee on Foreign Relations of the Senate a report which identifies all U.S. states, statutes, regulations which treat U.S. citizens living abroad differently from United States citizens residing within the United States, or which may cause directly or indirectly competitive disadvantage for Americans working abroad relative to the treatment by other major trading nations of the world of their nationals who are working outside their territory. This evaluates each such discriminatory practice, recommends legislation, any other remedial action the president finds appropriate to eliminate unfair or competitively disadvantaging treatment of Americans living or working abroad. So basically, this was seen as being important enough that Congress passed a law to say, stop being mean to those expats.
How could they possibly get this done in such a short period of time with all the discrimination?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, tell me, was in fact a report sent?
There was a report. It turns out that President Carter had some extra time, but he chose not to use it. He went ahead and submitted his report quite quickly, which surprised everybody. And so that I'm going to take issues from ACA's second report. So ACA's second report takes the first set of 50 issues plus the 13 extra and briefly summarizes them, and then brings in this idea of the competitiveness of the U.S., and it brings in President Carter's response. So the first issue related to taxation is number 27, worldwide nature of U.S. tax system, which taxes on basis of citizenship rather than residency. And so the first taxation related issue, the United States is the only major industrialized nation which taxes its citizens on a worldwide basis and not just on the basis of residency. This was not always the case, however. Between 1926 and 1962, the United States did not tax at all the foreign earned income of its citizens living and working overseas. And then skip. Recent tax legislation has generally eliminated the foreign earned income exclusion, substituting limited deductions for certain excess living costs. The anticipated effect of this new law is a substantially higher tax bill for American taxpayers abroad, and where they are reimbursed for the excessive tax cost, their employers. I think something went wrong with the slide. So then they changed issue number 27. Actually, this is interesting. I left this in. Okay. Let me make a mid-course correction here. So the slide that I just went through, this is slide 7, is issue 27 from report 1, from the original report. And then given the instruction to make it about U.S. competitiveness. Then ACA's report 2 changed it to U.S. taxation of overseas Americans creates competitive problems. So that's slide 8. The United States tax policy is that all American citizens, no matter where they may live, have the same obligation to pay U.S. taxes on their earned and unearned income. No other major country of the free world has this tax approach. All of the rivals to the United States tax their citizens on the basis of their residence. This applies to taxation of earned income and foreign unearned income as well. So that the American will be competing with an extra burden. So I found it very interesting, this rewrite. And John, you asked me the question about revenue neutrality for things like elimination of citizenship-based taxation or elimination of double taxation. Here I think we have a perfect example of how the narrative changes when we hear that Congress is emphasizing something. It might be an opportunity, but then it also might end up, somewhat weakening the message. I'm not sure which of these issues 27 is stronger. So this is the only case where I put both of them. Then it's interesting, the points that are made. I had this is a very old scan of the document, so some of these screenshots are pretty ugly. Then if you look at the bottom of the slide on page, the bottom of slide 8, so the number of observations can be made about this U.S. policy. First, as a basic principle, it is a paradigm example of a situation where equity with, onto slide 9, Americans at home conflicts with equity and competition against individuals of other nationalities abroad. Most curious that the stoutly maintained necessity for Americans to carry their obligations on the basis of citizenship, no matter where they reside, is so obviously at variance with the U.S. practice of not giving rights or benefits on the basis of citizenship, but rather defining many of these on the basis of residency. I think that is brilliant.
Well, it's just one more demonstration of the hypocrisy, right?
But I thought they said it extremely well. Third, the United States has just expended a considerable amount of time and labor to negotiate a new multilateral trade agreement to ensure freer movement of U.S. goods and services into the major markets of the world. Yet in parallel with this negotiating effort, the United States has twice expended considerable effort elaborating new tax practices that impede the ability of its citizens to compete in these same markets. So here I want to, get Brent's input, saying that there needs to be, Americans need to be treated in first place, starting by their own government.
Well, it's sort of like saying that Americans can compete internationally only if they stay in the United States, right?
Exactly. Then makes the point fourth, the United States maintains that it wants to promote fair competition around the world. Then, we make using American labor abroad more costly. So we have unilaterally distorted the world labor market by imposing a unique burden on workers of one nationality, our own.
But aren't they really saying here that the United States has a general principle, that the only country that can discriminate against Americans is America?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, what I have not put, I need to add. So the president's reply to this, they went on, there were 9 points. I didn't put all of them in the slides, but they really put their heart into this point 27, issue 27. President's reply. The president chose not to address this question. Not to address this question. He replied, many correspondents objected to the tax revisions in the Foreign Earned Income Act enacted last year, 1978. It is frequently alleged that those revisions, especially in the income exclusion provision, will have detrimental effects on the ability of American business to hire American citizens to work abroad, which in turn may result in reduced American exports or reduced profits earned abroad by American business. This report does not address this matter because its purpose is to focus on the issue of discrimination.
Suzanne, that is just so totally fascinating. And as you were
Isn't that
reading
right?
this,
I told you needed that McDonald's coffee.
yeah, well, I just finished the first one. I'm on to the second one. But anyway, as you were reading that, my mind moved forward to July of 2015, when
Mm,
what happened was that at the time, Senator Hatch was, was having a sort of Senate finance investigation in international tax practices, and he, of course, was getting all these submissions, and the vast majority of submissions were, in fact, from Americans abroad. It was like 3/4 of them. Okay, and
mhm.
the only reference in the final report to the submissions of individual Americans abroad was the last page of the report. I think it was page 63. And it was the last paragraph of the last page, where what it said was, it was approximately this. Okay. It said, well, we recognize that, 3/4 of the submissions came from individual Americans abroad. And we really think that at some future time, this should be dealt with, but this is just outside the scope of what we're able to deal with right now.
Right.
Exactly the same thing.
And we had the same thing with the PFIX. It's like
Absolutely.
exactly in response to the question. And yeah, yeah. So
So what do you think it is? Is it see no evil, hear no evil, or speak no evil, or all of the above?
I think people are just really, really good at uh, stonewalling so that eventually people go away. But the thing is,
Why are they interested in stonewalling this? I mean, like, I just can't understand. I really can't.
well,
Why, after all these years, you know, they don't just say, well, I mean, yeah, we agree. This is unfair. Let's just change it. Like, what is the problem with this exactly? Why does the United States, why is it clearly part of the DNA of the United States of America, whether it's Republicans, Democrats, why is it part of the DNA to punish their citizens abroad? Why is that?
well, I think that there are a lot of individuals who think that this should change, and sometimes we see individuals with the courage to come and we see McGovern in the context of this report really taking a strong stand. We have seen Holding and LaHood coming and showing the courage to try to bring this forward. But people have so many issues that they need to address, and we are a relatively small group, and our voices have not been as together as they should be, which means that other people are screaming louder, and it's easier to just move ahead. And it is very hard for one person to go and change the direction. Uh, what we do see here with the ACA report is that when a large number of people wrote to their representatives, that stuff happened. We did have a conversation that involved President Carter, and we did have a law passed to tell President Carter that he needed to talk about this. And imagine if we would have had a similar report in 1980, and if this would have continued. I think things got just enough better that people said, okay, because everybody's busy. Very few people have the time. And part of the reason they're so busy is that They're spending, all these incredible hours working on their taxes.
It takes a
Uh,
lot of time to be an American citizen, doesn't it? It really takes a lot of
it, it,
time. Yes.
it takes, yeah, it takes a huge amount of time, really huge. Uh, so, so that's why I think that what we need to do is go back to what ACA was doing. And all of us, we need to join forces and do what they were doing, and just making sure that the message keeps coming, and that it is clear, and that it is more and more, 1,000 people for PFIX, thousand people for this, 1,000 people for that, everybody reaching out. We've got Democrats, we've got Republicans, um, you know, all the people who became libertarians because they came out of the last election going, "Oh, I don't know what I am," and so that we need to make it so that the easier path is not ignoring us.
Well, would you
And
say that up until now and including now, would you say that Americans abroad have a tendency to divide and therefore conquer themselves?
I think you've got very busy people. Yes, yes, I think that's definitely true. Definitely true. And like so much of our airspace goes to, well, I don't like the approach that this group took, or I disagree with this. Uh, so that, and I think that one of the things that is happening now is that there are increasingly conversations between people where people lay out their positions and say, okay, yeah, I can understand your point. And I appreciate what you're doing, even though I don't agree. But here we do agree. So let's make this happen. I think technology is helping a lot with that. But the other thing is that people are really busy. And so when they get involved with taxation, they want to solve their problem. And then when somebody else brings up something that doesn't affect them, they say, oh, that's not my issue. But one of the nice things about these 63 points that ACA went to the trouble to develop is that each one of these points is developed for everybody. Uh, and one of the things that I think is really great is that the intellectual capability that is being applied to this problem by you know by all of the groups involved is simply phenomenal. So as we do that, what happens is we become better at understanding the issues that our community faces. And when we act as a community, then we can come together. We can take care of our own. We can fight for each other, and it becomes less of a zero-sum game. It isn't that, well, if that group gets what they want, then it's going to make my group less well off. It is, if we all put this together, everybody, every single one of us, from the accidentals to uh, to people with questions about estates, everybody is going to have fairer treatment. And every time we help the US government do something better, then it becomes better. When people do unfair things, they become more unfair. And when they do things to make things fair, they become more fair. So it's worth doing. Um, so that was 27. 28. Okay, issue number 28. This is slide number 12. By the way, I inserted President Carter's response, or lack thereof, to issue number 27 into the slides. So
Right.
issue number.
Yeah. Look, can I just read it in? Okay, I'd like to read it in. I think it's worth
Okay.
reading in. So yeah, this is what's currently slide 11. The president's
Yeah.
reply: the president chose to not address this question.
Yes.
Wow. He replied, many correspond. Wasn't he required to address that question?
Yeah, but
Hey, he's the
let me
president. Okay.
let me
Many
let me see if I can.
correspondents objected to the tax revisions in the foreign earned income tax enacted last year, 1978. It is frequently alleged that those revisions, especially in the income exclusion provision, will have detrimental effects on the ability of American business to hire American citizens to work abroad, which in turn may
Yeah,
result.
Carter just said it. You know,
Well, this report does
real
not address this
politics,
matter
right?
because its purpose is to focus on the issue of discrimination. Well, isn't that
But that's
obviously
against
discrimination?
it is discrimination, and it is also against the law that asked uh, not only for the issue of discrimination to be addressed, but also the issue of U.S. competitiveness.
So in other words, this is partial compliance with the law, selective compliance.
Yeah, or like just what is the least I can do uh, to not actively be in trouble, keeping in mind that he was real quick about writing this response, even though there had been extra time allotted. The report was not due until the beginning of 1980, and he turned it in the middle of 1979,
Hmm.
which surprised people. So it seems like he wanted to just really try to slip this one in.
I don't know.
Um,
That's an interesting question. Well, okay. Anyway, interesting. Please continue.
all right. So, issue number 28, inadequate U.S. tax credit for taxes paid abroad.
No kidding.
And
My
like
God, the
where
more things change, the more they stay the same, right?
yeah. And so uh, then, ACA's question, if the United States, you see in the middle of slide 12, if the United States must insist on being the only major country to subject its overseas citizens to double tax liability, why does the United States not give a more generous treatment to the different forms of taxes that are paid abroad in terms of credit against taxes deemed due to the US government? President's reply: foreign sales taxes have historically not been deductible for U.S. income tax purposes because of the administrative difficulties of checking on so many different systems. However, under the Foreign Earned Income Act of 1978, qualifying U.S. citizens working abroad are allowed to deduct a cost of living differential for excess living costs abroad. Foreign sales taxes, including the value added taxes, are reflected in the cost of living index. Moreover, unlike state and local income taxes, which may only be deducted in computing taxable income for federal income taxes imposed by political subdivisions of foreign countries may be credited against federal income tax, reducing the tax dollar for dollar. And so this credit provides significant advantage to Americans abroad who are subject to foreign income taxes. For example, in Switzerland, the total Swiss income tax burden is higher than in the United States, yet the income tax levied by the national government is insignificant. Being allowed to credit income taxes paid to the cantons is therefore a very significant benefit to U.S. citizens living in Switzerland. Well, this is true. People say to me, "Oh, you're living in Switzerland, and the taxes are so low, like tax haven," and you're like, no, it's like you got the canton, and then you've got the commune, and by the time they're finished, you be paying a
But
lot
you
less
get
tax.
the impression from this that the United States believes that, well, the United States and the United States alone understands what legitimate taxation really is, right?
Yeah, and also if it takes a lot of work, now you can ask your citizens to have crushing burdens like PFICs, but it's too much trouble for us to go through the work of doing these calculations, and we're so generous. But like you remember the bill that was just submitted. You had written a passionate response. Karen Alpert wrote a passionate response. Democrats abroad wrote a different kind of passionate response.
Yeah, I
Uh,
remember vaguely.
yes, and so that what you have is this bill that is going forward, going, oh, here are several things that we're going to do to make things better for for expats. And in the same way, President Carter is saying, yes, but look, we are allowing Swiss taxes to be used for foreign tax credits. And so that I just saw a pattern there. I think that ACA handled it very well. You know, like, you know, having the various responses is very useful. But you know, reading this type of response is, but we're already doing so well, and it would be so much work for us to have to do it more thoroughly. It's, you know, just you can feel like the visceral response.
Well, you know, it
Uh,
reminds me very much of Professor Zelensky's new paper in praise of citizenship taxation. Have you read that?
I have had that on my. I just haven't had the, you know, the emotional strength to read
Well,
it.
you really must read it because you know one of the points that he makes is that, you know, look, it's just administratively easier to use citizenship as a basis for tax rate. It's just easier to do. You know, we don't get into these fights about whether somebody really has a legitimate connection to the United States.
Uh, yeah,
I mean, isn't it the
uh,
same sort of stuff, really?
it's the same sort of stuff. Yeah.
You know, with a little more sort of sleight of hand, but yeah.
Uh,
Well, you know,
that's
I think there is something to this that, you know, it's really a lot easier to just make up reasons to do stuff, right? I mean,
absolutely, and definitely, because you know, it's not like uh, people are able to devote full time to this, for the most part, especially in government. You know, they're busy, and this is a side issue that doesn't affect very many people, it seems to them.
you know, I don't
But
understand. I mean, I think that there are some solutions to this problem that, you know, really are just as easy. I mean, I think the first thing is why not just, you know, I mean, President Trump is talking about the External Revenue Service. Why not just designate every carbon life form in the world as a U.S. tax resident? And wouldn't that make more sense?
well, uh, John, would you please hold that for a few more issues, because
Okay.
I have I have a nice place to. Uh,
All right.
I'd like to go on to that in context.
Continuing on.
All right. So issue number 30: taxation of phantom income generated by exchange rate movements abroad. And I'll jump, and I think we all know that this is still very much an issue. Also, let's jump down to the middle of slide 13, the president's reply. When income or capital gains are reported for US tax purposes, the value is expressed in US dollars. Due to fluctuating exchange rates, the value of income or an asset which remains constant in foreign currency terms will vary in US currency terms. In countries where the currency has strengthened relative to the dollar, a US taxpayer may report a higher US dollar income or inflated capital gain, even though his foreign currency income or foreign property value has remained constant. To alleviate situations such as these, a cost of living differential deduction, which reflects variations in exchange rates, is allowed under the Foreign Earned Income Act of 1978. While exchange fluctuations work both ways, the cost of living differential operates only when the foreign costs are higher in dollar terms and does not increase income when foreign costs are lower. Thus, there is no negative deduction in the low cost of living country. And then the response by ACA: uh, we don't know whether the president meant this response to be serious or whether he was having fun. We were already told that the cost of living deduction was supposed to cover sales tax and VAT that we are denied abroad. Apparently, this deduction is also is meant to cover phantom income inflation as well. And no doubt it has a triple function of recognizing that there are real costs of living factors also, which are not due to either of these other issues. So I, I can see uh, somebody, um, you know, sometimes in the response to the president's reply, some real personality kind of slips through. Um,
I think he was having fun. That would be my vote. I think he was having fun.
Whether he was having fun. I think that there would be healthier ways to have fun. But you can just see the the drafters from ACA going, "You're kidding me, right? You cannot make this stuff up." And then there is so that was issue 31, and then that was issue 30. Issue 31 is very similar, taxation of phantom capital gains. Issue number 32 is preferential U.S. tax treatment of government employees abroad. And I asked ChatGPT, I mean, this was completely a new thought for me. So I asked ChatGPT, is this still in actuality? And the answer is yes. That U.S. government employees abroad have higher allowances for housing and schooling, etc., than private people do. And nobody understands why this would be the case. And why is it that we see the value in government employees? This is not ChatGPT, this is me. Why do we see the value in having government employees living abroad, but we don't see the value of private citizens living abroad?
Well, because private citizens might vary politically, right, in their views of international affairs, the United States, and economics. Government employees are almost by nature just representatives of the government, right?
Maybe. I still think there's a real discrepancy there.
Oh, I think there's definitely a discrepancy. I'm just explaining, what I think the discrepancy may be. But I think it's crazy. Suzanne, no matter how you look at it, okay, it's like how can I put it in modern terms? The U.S. government is treating its citizens very, very, very badly. The U.S. government is treating its citizens abroad very, very, very badly. Yes.
Very badly. Yes. Yeah. They are. And wouldn't it be nice if it changed? So issue number 33. Tax treatment of income blocked by exchange controls abroad. Here again, this is something.
Oh, I love this one. I love this.
I never thought of, and so I again asked ChatGPT, does this still exist? And it's like, yep. That for the most part, foreign currencies are freely convertible into dollars, but not all. And you still have cases where somebody would end up in a situation where it takes a while before they are able to convert their currency into dollars. And then when it gets converted, then it all is earned, and that can be a real problem, and it remains a real problem. But then I said, I asked ChatGPT, could this apply to cryptocurrencies? And the answer is yes. You could end up in a situation where a cryptocurrency would be blocked, and then you would have a similar effect. So that the taxation landscape for the U.S. Now, this is not true in the other countries where I've had experience, but for the U.S., it's a minefield where suddenly there's something that you'd never think about, and it's not in publication 54, etc. But it just basically changes your entire taxation structure, and that you really need not only experts but world-class experts to have an idea of what these minefields are. So, by the way, on some of these points, what I have done, for example, if you look at the spreadsheet for issue number 33, which is in line 34, you'll see that there is a note under whether it's current. And here I put the insights that were provided by ChatGPT.
Sorry, which slide is
that? So that is the spreadsheet.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Line 34.
Line 34.
And if you go over to column D, you'll see that there's a little triangle in the upper right-hand corner. And if you hover your cursor over the cell in D34, then you'll see that there's a note which puts these insights.
Okay.
And concluding, while the specific circumstances have changed since 1979, the fundamental concern of being taxed on income or assets that are inaccessible remains. Both traditional blocked currency scenarios and modern digital asset restrictions highlight the ongoing relevance of issue 33, underscoring the need for tax policies that consider the practical realities of asset accessibility. So who would have thought, and John, the fact that I'm learning about this issue from ACA's 1979 report, I think has information content.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
Okay.
this is a specific instance, right, of the general problem of taxation of fake income, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and so
Exactly.
we have all kinds of modern analogs on this. We've seen recently transition tax, guilty, PFIC, foreign trust rules.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about the taxation of Americans abroad is that one principle would simply be this: if you don't pay us tax on income you never receive now, we're going to tax you even more punitively when you do actually receive it, right? And whatever you're talking about a minute ago, the blocked income thing, that's an example of it, isn't it? Same thing.
And we go back to the Morse case, which is, well, somebody earned income. It wasn't you, but you know what? We don't, but you're the only American we can get our hands on.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, this would be worth a blog post, actually. Feel free if you like, Suzanne. The comparison between tax-free and of income blocked by exchange controls abroad is very similar, to the subpart F transition tax guilty, right? I swear to God, I mean, the way the American tax system works is, if the income isn't really apparent, by God, we're gonna make it up somewhere, right?
Well, I think I remember the podcast that you did with Laura Snyder, and really making the point that so there was income even though you didn't receive it. So the U.S. government is just like practicing its ability. I'm putting words in your mouth now because I don't remember exactly what you said, but what I took away from it was, well, your grandmother got some income, or your neighbor down the street got some income, or the shop next door got some income, and so we're just going to attribute it to you because
Exactly. I mean, why shouldn't you pay tax on income received by somebody else? You're an American. To whom much has been given, much is expected.
Now, so John, on that point, so here in 1979, there is still the expectation that things should be fair. They should be non-discriminatory. And then as we go to the treatment of the Morse case, then that sense is lost.
Totally.
That language has stopped having meaning in the same way.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I have a question for you, Suzanne. I mean, you say in 1979 there was an expectation of fairness on the part of who? I agree that on the part of ACA there's an expectation of fairness.
On the part of ACA, on the part of George McGovern, on the part of the government that passed, the Section 611, saying yes, we think that there should be fairness, and the fact that they saw a need to pass a law says to me that there was a recognition that there is this inherent unfairness. I think that it goes back to the roots from the Civil War, where there was just so much anger against the people who were sitting in Paris not paying taxes when at home, people were having a really hard time. And once you have that type of viciousness, then it generates a lot of unfortunate behavior. But I think that we really saw an effort to try to get things back, back on an even keel. But then also the reaction in 1962 to the film stars who were abusing, the ability to exclude foreign earned income. But it gets better. Okay.
Oh,
Issue number 34. Short title: Discriminatory Taxation of Americans with an Alien Spouse.
no. Really?
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Okay. And so summary of the problem. I will read this one. If an American is unmarried and lives abroad.
Sorry, where are you reading from now? This is
slide number 15. Sorry.
okay. Yep. Got it.
Okay. Summary of discriminatory taxation of Americans with an alien spouse.
Ooh.
Summary of the problem. If an American is unmarried and lives abroad, he files U.S. income tax as a single person, has the maximum tax protection benefit. If he marries an alien, his U.S. tax status changes. Unless he accepts to file a joint return with his alien spouse, who may never have been to the United States and have no intention to ever go there, and accepts to have his spouse also pay U.S. income taxes on all of her worldwide earned and unearned income, he must file as a married filing separately, individual, and he also forfeits his maximum tax protection. ACA's question: why does the United States want to tax non-resident aliens abroad, and why are Americans living abroad with a non-resident alien spouse faced with either paying tax on the spouse's income or losing significant U.S. tax benefits?
Well, obviously the answer is because you married an alien spouse. Why didn't you marry an American citizen? Isn't that the answer?
Yeah.
What do they say? What is the President Carter? What is his reply?
You want to read it?
All right, here we go. The rules concerning joint filing status where one spouse is a non-resident alien are the same for Americans living in the U.S. as they are for Americans abroad. Okay, I don't think I need to read the rest. It occurs to me you might have some commentary on that, Suzanne.
You need to read the rest.
Okay, here we go. It gets worse, does it? All right. Both spouses must be subject to U.S. tax in order to qualify for the benefits of the maximum tax on earned income. Married taxpayers who choose not to file a joint return must file as married, filing separately rather than as single persons. This is the so-called marriage penalty, for which there seems to be no solution satisfactory to all if these rules, including the prohibition against an annual option on filing a joint or separate return, were changed only for U.S. citizens abroad married to non-resident aliens. Such citizens could escape tax on their share of the spouse's community income. This is not possible for U.S. citizens living in the U.S. who are married to non-resident aliens. Woo!
Okay, so then ACA kind of jumps in, and again, the real person is escaping from the tightly controlled diplomacy. So on slide 16, ACA responds, once again, we don't know how to take the reply given by the president. First of all, it seems to us to say that Americans abroad with an alien spouse must be taxed the same as Americans living at home is one thing, but to say that Americans abroad with a non-resident alien spouse must be taxed the same as an American at home with a non-resident alien spouse is quite another. We wonder just what kind of household it is that has a non-resident alien spouse in the United States. Surely this must be a rare exception rather than the general rule abroad. On the contrary, this is the rule in almost every case.
Well,
So,
I think it might be worth pausing there right? I mean, what they're really saying, okay, is that residence doesn't matter, right? That's what they're really saying. Our tax jurisdiction applies irrespective of residence, because the point is that for the overwhelming majority of U.S. citizens living in the United States with an alien spouse, the alien spouse is also a resident, right?
Right.
Which changes it. Um, but I mean, that is an incredibly extraordinary statement that indicates no appreciation or understanding of the issue, and that has a definition of equality that means subjecting everybody to exactly the same law. It's like the 17th century France, the law in its majestic equality prohibits equally the rich and the poor from sleeping on the park bench, right?
Right. So,
But no, but continue on. Wow, it even gets better. I mean, every time I think they've outdone themselves, it gets more amazing. Second,
why does the United States feel that it has any right to tax a non-resident alien at all? And John, this is the point where I wanted you to come, I wanted, you bring up your point about, well, like we'll just declare everybody U.S. citizens.
well,
Um,
wouldn't that be better than formally annexing Canada? Why not just declare them all U.S. citizens? Wouldn't that solve the problem right there? They could then use the U.S. tax system to extract all the revenue out of the country, okay, and leave Canada to pick up the costs, right? Wouldn't that be better?
oh man. And then they continue, the overseas American has precious little to show for his tax dollar. Wow. Surely the non-resident alien abroad has nothing at all. Indeed, it is just such non-resident aliens who suffer from our discriminatory citizenship laws and other unfortunate practices. We would ask the president what principle of American or even international law makes such taxation justifiable.
Hmm.
And third, we would ask the president to tell us why an American marrying a non-resident alien abroad must either pay the United States government a full tax on his or her worldwide income or else lose some very important U.S. tax benefits himself. The president has mentioned this as a marriage penalty situation. Indeed, it is, but not at all the same type occurring in the United States, where both individuals would have a tax liability in any case. The non-resident alien spouse abroad before the marriage did not have such a liability. So I just thought that was, the fact that this incredible conversation took place and 49 years later, starting from 76, so 45 years later, okay, we're still like going, wait, but we really meant it. This has got to move forward.
Actually, I think that the issues are better articulated by ACA in 1980 than they are by most groups today.
Once now, so it's really interesting, John. I had been given a copy of this document many months ago, maybe a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. And I looked at it and I was just amazed at the idea that there would be a law, but I didn't, it was when I was new to the taxation space. I didn't know who these people were. And the document is kind of very hard to follow. You've got all of these letters and of transmission, and it's also not very friendly to the eyes. So and you don't want to print it out because it's 150 pages. So I kind of glanced at it, but I didn't really understand what it was. But now that I dug in and I realized that the whole thing was built around the ACA report and the ACA second report, I decided to really put my focus there. And the second report I did print out and underlined, went back to a pen. And I think it's just a phenomenal job. So I think that You know, they really deserve a shout out. And if we can kind of pull everything that we're doing and go back to the holding bill and, you know, what worked, what didn't hurt, you know, the, you know, the efforts that have come close to reaching the goal. And, you know, just pull all of it together, make sure that everybody has access to this material, uh, then and combine it with things like David Pinto's, you know, simulation, and uh, then I think, you know, eventually it's going to get better because, you know,
Well, I
they're
think it's worth noting, Suzanne. I don't think we've quite said this on the spaces, but the origin of ACA was actually, it was formed, my understanding is, by leaders of both the Democrats and the Republicans.
It's my understanding that it is bipartisan. You know, the people I've interacted, I haven't had much interaction with them, but the people that I've interacted with were clearly operating in a bipartisan way.
Yeah.
I think that's what they say on their website as well. Isn't the same true of ARA?
I really don't know. If you read the book that I sent you, the blog post, there may be some clues in that. I mean, I think my impression is that Arrow is completely non-political, completely non-political. I mean, it didn't come together. My impression is that this ACA may have been formed to respond to this President Carter directive, okay? Although I'm not entirely sure of that. I don't believe that Arrow was. Arrow was, you know, more just a bunch of people living in Paris, you know.
Yeah. So ACA describes kind of things coming together, and it seems that it was very much inspired by the 1976 Act.
The voting thing.
Yeah, but then they probably came together to write this report. No, the voting thing was 1975.
I see. Yeah.
1976.
Okay. Yeah. So they came together to write the report. Yeah. In any case, I mean, my understanding of this is, I mean, some of these people were around until relatively recently, right? So Mr. Andrew Sundberg, you know, was a huge player in this space. I'm sure you've come across his name. You know, and some of his writing. I mean, you know, he was
Yeah.
involved in this until, I mean, I think I mean, he's no longer alive, but I think that, you know, as of 15 years ago or 18 years ago, he was still active.
Mhm. And so then hopefully the passion keeps us all, you know, like young and kicking. So so we have time to take this across the goal. Um, and okay, we have a few more. I'll try to keep this under 2 hours. Uh, so issue number 40, lack of sufficient time to pay tax from abroad. You know, automatic extension to June 15th. This is slide 17, but expected to pay their US tax on April 15th. If they pay the tax at the same time they've calculated it, they have to pay interest from April 15th. The president's reply: taxes of US taxpayers payable with return are due generally no later than April 15th of each year. An extension of time to file the return and to pay taxes due with the return to June 15th is granted automatically to US citizens and residents living or traveling outside the United States. Taxpayers who are not abroad may receive an extension of time to file their return by submitting the appropriate forms. Taxpayers who utilize an extension of time to file their return are responsible for payment of interest on the tax due from April 15th.
So cool.
And
Another non-answer. Another ignoring the question.
Total non-answer. So
Yeah.
let me go down there. I'll read. So that was 40. You know, the president told us what we already knew. We asked him why this practice was not altered to coincide with the deadline for filing. He chose not to address this question. You know, like just.
Well, actually, on balance, I would say that that the questions are not addressed. Period. Right? I mean, you know, this
Not
is
addressed.
you know, reciting the unfairness. Why do we have this unfairness? Well, because we have this unfairness.
Yeah, it's like, well, What do you not understand about what the rules are? Why should we change it for you? Um,
It's not even that nuanced. It's not even that nuanced, man.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. So I think some people know who I am. John knows who I am.
Yeah, this is Tim Smith.
Yes. So on the subject of some of the original people from ACA, I think yeah, Andy Sundberg died in the early 2010s. Roger Conklin, his name might come up. He died a little bit later in maybe the mid to late 2010s. Patrick Hale, I don't know if his name comes up anyway. He's still alive. He lives down in Connecticut, just outside of New York City. I've met him several times. I was involved working with him, a lot when I was involved in this issue more 10 years ago. Yeah, so I think ACA kind of just from the history I was told by people like Patrick and Roger, ACA was kind of formed to be a little more radical, a little more rabble-rousing than Arrow was, a little more political bent. I think under the current leadership, they've kind of shifted away from that. I think there's been times, and I would make maybe the case even today, that Arrow is now a more political group than ACA is, under ACA's current president. But yeah, historically, ACA was the more rabble-rousing group. But they're still both groups are very European, I think. John knows this well. ACA did an event in Canada once because I was there and he was there. And John was kind of semi-hosting the event. And I think some of the ACA people were kind of like, we got to get out of here. These Canadian Americans in Canada are like way too radical for us, type of thing.
That's funny.
Yeah, that was a good event. It was a good event. You can actually find the video. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Tim, I think you've got some background noise here that's creating a problem.
Yeah. Oh, let's see if this is better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, Tim, could you mute yourself unless you're specifically going to speak?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Perfect.
The event that Tim is referring to was 2014. I organized, along with ACA, a conference on citizenship taxation. It was held at the University of Toronto. And it featured Bernard Schneider, okay, who was on one of our earlier spaces, Professor Bernard Schneider and Professor Michael Kirsch, who, in the early years was an advocate for the retention of citizenship taxation. And it was an interesting day. That is available on YouTube. I'd be happy to find it and send out a link. I haven't looked at it for years, but it is available. Yeah.
That's a great idea, and thank you, Tim. Those are helpful points because, John, I think that a theme of today is that we need to take good care of our roots, and just appreciate the energy that has gone into fighting this battle, over the past decades. So I think that's highly relevant.
No, I agree with you totally. I agree with you totally on that. There's been a lot of people who've done a lot of work over the years, including ACA, who, really do deserve a lot of credit. I mean, if nothing else, for the longevity. I mean, untold numbers of people have dipped their toe into the water and out very quickly, right? But it's only a small number of groups, individuals who've been in this for the long haul.
Yeah. But the fact that, we're going through this report today and, I thought this was going to be a very short space and that it was going to be just you and me, John, because, when you look at the 150 pages, it makes you want to go curl up under a blanket and have a have a nice big cup of hot tea. But and here we are, like well into the second hour, and and still going strong and learning some new things.
Oh, it's a very, very rich report. It really is. I mean, I think
And I'm
that
thinking through. I mean, I left out a lot of stuff that's very interesting.
I actually think that it articulates a lot of the issues better than
I
are
think they did
articulated today.
a great job.
Yeah.
And so you had mentioned that you were going to invite somebody from ACA to do a space.
Well, I did. I reached out to Charles Bruce, and I got one response to him saying, get back to me next week, which I did, and I've not heard back from him. But yeah, I'm still working on that.
So it'd be interesting to have his take on, the points that we're looking at here. Like
Oh, totally.
how does ACA
Totally. Unfortunately, none of the people affiliated with the ACA were around in the form, what I would call the formative years of the organization. But no, they've been there, and they have a longevity.
Yeah. So, yeah, great. Okay, issue number 43, short title, Lack of Relevant Information Guides for Taxes Abroad.
No kidding.
Summary of the problem. IRS pamphlets are almost entirely designed to help the domestic American taxpayer prepare his tax return. Yeah. So skipping down to the president's reply. This is on slide 18. The president said that the IRS is trying to help Americans abroad. The IRS has prepared 5 special publications of relevance to overseas Americans and 1 comprehensive guide exclusively for their use. I guess that's publication 54. That was updated to include PFIX when Democrats Abroad got 1,300 people, or however many it was, to write letters saying, you're not telling us about PFIX. And it's like, oh, okay, we'll tell you that PFIX may be an issue for you.
That's too bad it was updated, actually.
Well, maybe, but
well, what it does is it gives cover for the tax preparation industry. You put even more pressure on people to proceed on the basis that things are PFIX and et cetera, right? Which often I think require an independent analysis. But that said, let's continue on.
Yeah. So 1 comprehensive guide exclusively for their use that we're not going to update until Democrats Abroad says that they have to in 2025. That was my input. There are a few IRS employees stationed in key cities abroad who can respond to questions, and there will be longer visits to other embassies to help local Americans with their returns. Finally, the president stated that in 1976, there were only 164,000 tax returns filed from abroad, other than from military post offices, compared to a total of 84.5 million individual tax returns. From that perspective, the publications and personal assistance provided to overseas Americans are substantial when compared to the assistance given to Americans at home. And I'm like, you cannot make this up.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, Suzanne, you read this and you're left with the impression that U.S. citizenship taxation is really an expression of love for its citizens abroad. Do you think?
Well, the thing is that when we're so trivial, then, why bother? If you're not going to bother with us, then why bother with us? ACA continued, the last quoted phrase sums up the attitude of the IRS on most questions of why overseas Americans are not receiving better treatment. This is simply that the overseas taxpayer is already getting more than his share of the IRS's time and should be happy with what he has.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So.
Well, actually, things were better back then than they are now. Yeah. I mean, at least at least then they were saying that, Americans abroad were front and center. Now it's just sort of, I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing. Anyway, okay.
I think it's about the same. I think that that the attitude is similar, and
Do you think that's what my mother meant when she said at the age of 93, nothing much has changed? Do you think that's what she meant?
I think that's what she meant.
It must have
Yes.
been. I'll check.
Yeah. Yeah. My mother-in-law is about to turn 96, and I think that she would agree.
Ah, okay.
So issue number 44, difficulty in obtaining tax forms abroad. Would we ever have difficulty obtaining, the required tax forms? We have the internet, but uh, and then the president's reply. The president replied that the IRS is trying as hard as it can. This is false. It is not trying as hard as it can to help overseas Americans. Widely used specialized forms are mailed to all U.S. taxpayers overseas. If a form is little used, it is too costly to mail to all Americans living abroad. However, this year, the foreign bank account form and the new foreign moving expense form have been added to the mailed package. And ACA responds, the foreign bank account form is one of the items that have caused great inconvenience to overseas Americans for many years. Every overseas American usually has to file such forms, but up until 1979, the IRS has refused to place these forms in the standard package. When these and other forms are not available, the overseas American is still accountable for making the returns on time and subject to all of the penalties for failure to file or for late filing. So the good news is now we can file our F4 bars online. The bad news is that the penalty is $10,000 for somebody who misses if it's non-willful. But going back to the whole PFIC discussion and analysis, one of the points that was made was, the IRS or OMB in their analysis said we will not automate the form or make an electronic version of the form because the numbers are too small. And then it turned out that the numbers were off by a factor of 1,000 because of an error that was then corrected. And it's just not that difficult to automate a form. But the thing is that because the form is not automated, then PFICs remain extremely difficult. So the same discussion is captured here that we now have today. Plus, the tax forms were already very complex back then. Now we have a lot more technology to help, but filling in a U.S. tax form is one of the most complex things that one does in life. It's
Right.
just so crazy. Issue number 45, IRS deficiencies in adapting to overseas tax environment. Summary of the problem. Among the typical practices of the IRS that harass, innocently or otherwise, the overseas American are the sending of tax assessment notices by sea mail with payment dates that have usually expired before the assessment note has been received. President's reply. Airmail is used to transmit printed material and correspondence overseas, although admittedly, there have been occasional instances in which the mailing of IRS material has been unduly delayed. Some Americans abroad have also criticized the short 10-day period allowed to pay income tax assessments. The IRS is now reviewing this matter to see whether a longer period is warranted for some or all foreign addresses. So here we are, Back to the Future, and it easily happens still now that one gets a letter that has taken 6 to 8 weeks to arrive, and there was something payable, and I think that happened to me once where I received a letter from the IRS a couple of months after it was mailed, that had, that like $20 were owed or something. And then, by the time I got it, it was like way past the deadline. And then I sent them a check, but then there was another check for the interest on the $20. And it took several exchanges of letters to get it straight. And of course, all of that was by snail mail. So, the same issues. AACA says what the president didn't add, however, was that in those instances where the IRS material has been unduly delayed, it is the overseas American who has to expend considerable extra energy to try to protect himself. There is no automatic extension for payment periods when the IRS makes a mistake. That's still very much the case. So issue number 46, lack of adequate IRS assistance abroad, and it's worse now. The president's reply, in addition to permanently, with a typo, permanently stationing IRS personnel in key embassies overseas, IRS tax specialists visit a number of principal cities to respond to questions, provide other assistance. In 1979, there will be more and longer visits due to the change in law in 1978. Complaints of a lack of adequate assistance have probably been due to the uncertain status of the law in the last couple of years. Now that new legislation is in place, the tax forms should remain relatively unchanged from year to year. Yeah, right. Okay. And and then ACA responded, this is on slide 22, the problem with inadequate assistance from the IRS for tax problems abroad is far more extensive than the suggestion the president offered as having been, quote unquote, probably due to the uncertain status of the U.S. tax law in recent years. This is but a small portion of the problem. Every year there are changes to tax practices at home. New tax court rulings are constantly being made that can impact on the tax status of Americans abroad. Even more distressing is the fact that the overseas countries of residence are also constantly changing their tax codes, practices, and an overseas American's U.S. tax status may well change due to changes in the foreign country's laws. And so the ACA comes down at the bottom. We asked the president to consider greatly increasing the budget of the IRS to expand the taxpayer services that are offered abroad. And John, this comes back to the question of revenue neutrality. If the IRS were to put in place the systems and services required for it to be a reasonable burden to file a U.S. tax return, it would cost so much more than the taxes that are collected from us. So revenue neutrality is just not the right measure.
Right.
So we're on the home stretch here. Issue 48. Okay, this is a fascinating one. I never would have known that this existed, except that somebody sent in a case to Democrats abroad, the Taxation Task Force, who had exactly this problem. So double taxation of income for days worked in the United States. So that what happens is that if somebody is residing outside the U.S., paid by a foreign employer, but they do a couple of days of work in the U.S. or some days in the U.S., then the U.S. says that's U.S. sourced income and they tax on it. But it's also taxed in the country of residence because it's foreign employment. But the tax credit, the foreign taxes paid on that income cannot be used to offset the U.S. taxes because the U.S. is saying this is not foreign sourced income. However, the country of residence says it is foreign sourced income and it is not U.S. income, so that you also can't have a foreign tax credit in the country of residence for the U.S. taxes, because they say, well, you reside in, say France. So, and, you work for a French company and you were paid in France. So this is, it's sourced in France. So France has it sourced in France. So you can't use the U.S. taxes as a credit. The U.S. says it's sourced in the U.S. because you were physically present, because their physical presence determines the source, and so you can't use the French taxes as a credit. So it's a total catch-22. The president's reply: where such problems of double taxation occur, they can be resolved in a tax treaty. But the tax treaty has the savings clause.
That's
It has a
exactly
savings
right.
clause, which means it doesn't apply to U.S. citizens.
Exactly.
So this is gaslighting at its finest.
Well, you know, in its totality, okay, it really indicates no understanding of this issue, right?
Well, nobody understands you. Like, I remember when I first, you read the tax treaty, or, a civil servant, and you go, oh, government, this is my compliance burden just became lighter. Isn't that thoughtful? And then you talk to somebody else who's also a civil servant, also a U.S. citizen, and they say, my tax accountant told me that there was something wrong about that and that it can cause problems. So I stopped doing it. But because everybody that I know who's a U.S. citizen, civil servant, had done the same thing with the tax treaty, but I wasn't able to explain to me. And so I hired a really top level accountant uh, who didn't know about the savings clause. And then when I figured out what appeared to be going on, and why other people were saying that you ought to be careful about using the tax treaty to say that you're a civil servant if you're a U.S. citizen, I said, wow, this seems like it would explain it. And this high level tax accountant that I'd gotten, because it had really a lot of experience and all these questions, said, no, that would be just too that would be just simply wrong. It's so deceptive. So people don't know about this, and I had to go back through several tax treaties to finally convince him. We were shouting at each other, and and then finally he realized he was just floored by the fact that there would be something so duplicitous, such an example of duplicity.
Sorry, your
And
tax accountant did not understand this?
my tax accountant did not know this, and he's an expert.
Why was he arguing?
Because he thought I was wrong. He told me that I was making a completely illogical and unreasonable conclusion. I was like,
But-
I wish that you were right. And then we got into a big question, because it comes down to a comma. Because there is a comma, and depending on how you interpret that comma, it could mean that the article about civil servants would be carved out of the savings clause. It was only, I had to go to the translation into French, which did not have the comma ambiguity. And then I saw it. Later, I discovered that there is a technical explanation, because, I'm not a tax expert. I'm just a normal person just doing their taxes, and so, but then I discovered the technical explanation, and the technical explanation, buried way deep, did have a reference to the savings clause. And but the tax treaty has all these examples of how to do things, and how this works out practically. Not a word on the savings clause. And then you go to the article about civil servants, government service, and there is no reference back to, by the way, if you are a U.S. citizen, please be aware that this does not apply to you. So it seems that it's done very deceitfully to make it so that the U.S. can say, we have this treaty for avoiding double taxation, which then people say in a grandiose way. And that's exactly what President Carter is doing right here. We've got a tax treaty for that. It's like, yeah, but it doesn't apply to U.S. citizens because of this carefully hidden savings clause.
So to be clear on this, okay, Tim, can you mute yourself until you're ready to talk?
I
You
was
got some
going to
kind
talk.
Okay.
I didn't want to interrupt, so I'll mute
Okay.
myself for another
No,
minute.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had to get off in a minute, but I wanted to suggest maybe doing Twitter space like this on the upcoming Canadian election and this discussion of a new economic insecurity partnership or whatever between
Sure.
Canada and the United States. I think that might be an important thing coming up in the near future.
Okay. So I would want you to be a major participant in that.
Yeah.
You know what, Tim? I'll send you an email. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Sounds good, because I got to get off now. So.
Yeah. Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Okay. So a comment on this whole issue. All right. With the savings clause and that, I think this really needs to be understood. Okay, in very simple terms. All U.S. citizens abroad are subject to double taxation the moment they become tax residents of a country other than the United States. It's tax residency that creates the legitimacy to tax, if you will, and therefore all U.S. citizens abroad, because and to the extent they are dual tax residents, are therefore subject to double taxation. That's number one. Point number two is this, that there is nothing, now, there may be examples, okay, carve-outs, if you will, where the United States might relinquish its rights to tax in certain circumstances, like the foreign earned income exclusion. But that does not mean that U.S. citizens abroad are not U.S. tax residents, because it applies only to foreign earned income. Three, this total BS about how tax treaties, foreign tax credits prevent double taxation is absolute garbage. Tax credits are the way you use to pay your U.S. tax. It's not avoiding double taxation. It's simply using taxes paid in another country to pay your U.S. tax. Point number four, if that's where we are. Generally speaking, tax treaties do not avoid double taxation, even the old ones. For example, the ones that include the basic clause, they're subject to U.S. laws and stuff like that. Until recently, and this has not been fully settled, generally are interpreted in the world as a way for the U.S. to impose, essentially to neuter the effects for U.S. citizens of any tax treaties. And five, leaving all that aside, the savings clause in and of itself, in the clearest possible terms, makes it clear right there in the treaty, okay, that the U.S. reserves the right to tax its citizens as though the tax treaty had never been entered into. And to that, I would add what that really means, and these other governments haven't figured that out, is that these other countries, by signing a U.S. tax treaty, have actually agreed to allow the United States to impose its own rules of worldwide taxation on their tax residents who live in their own country. So in other words, that response from whoever wrote it for President Carter is not only completely idiotic, at best it's completely idiotic, at worst it's an outright lie.
John, do you think it's fair to say that we need a word for something being exponentially convoluted, but I don't even know, given what Congress is at this point, would it even be possible to fix all of these, this tapestry of everything that's been put together for Americans abroad? I don't even if us, and we all think about this way too much, I struggle to even think of how we would necessarily fix this while also dealing with the political machinery that exists in the modern world.
There's only one way to fix it, and that's completely separate citizenship.
No, I get it.
That's it.
I get it. But if we were in charge and Congress said, okay, that's the one thing you can't do, you can do everything else you want to try and do, it would still be really difficult to actually try and chip away at the block of granite here.
Well, not
Almost like
necessarily.
code debt.
Well, I mean, there are things you could do that would help it enormously. If you get rid of the savings clause, for example, that would move, minimally move U.S. citizens in the same situation as green card holders. I mean, you'd have to attack it, in various ways like that. I mean,
But wouldn't that require going treaty by treaty? Like we
no,
can
I
barely
don't
even
think
get.
it would. I don't think it would because the U.S. could see. Here's where I disagree with a lot of the commentary on this, and I put it that way because I acknowledge that I may be wrong on this, but I don't think that I am. See, what the treaties say in the saving clause is they allow the U.S. to tax U.S. citizens, though the tax treaty never came. It doesn't require them to do so. And because the treaty allows the U.S. to impose these taxes on U.S. citizens, though the treaty did not exist, period, they don't have to do it. Okay? They could easily not do it and simply tax U.S. citizens as though they were treaty non-residents, right? In the same way that it might work for green card holders or something. So no, I don't think it needs a treaty renegotiation, number one. And number two, if it did, I mean, I don't have a complete answer for this, but it would seem to me that this could be done in terms of some kind of multilateral treaties, simply saying that somebody cannot be a tax resident of more than one country at a time.
You think and you think the U.S. would be willing to back down from that? Because it seems like the U.S. position is quite privileged because they're saying, okay, wherever you are, that tax code applies to you, and then whatever little advantages kind of exist in that tax code potentially, we're going to get you on all of those things too.
Well,
Like,
I mean, you're asking me theoretically how this might be done, and I gave an answer. But part of the problem here, and the thing that leads to confusion, is that you have a whole group of people who are technically Americans abroad who really are not exposed to this, either because all their income source is in the U.S., what I call the retirees abroad, who are really just on permanent vacation from a tax point of view, or, and I mean, I did a podcast on this just a few days ago with somebody, the whole issue of the digital nomads who actually use things like the foreign earned income exclusion, to potentially end up paying taxes nowhere, right? So it's really, really hard. I don't know what the answer is, but what I do believe is this, that we're down to a few months, and if this doesn't get in associated with the tax reform, I think that it's probably not going to be solved in anybody's useful life who's on this call, and that people should just renounce.
Going through the exercise of looking at what happened between 1976 and 1979, and seeing that, so there was this act in 1976 taking away the foreign earned income exclusion. That was a major big deal, and also increasing the compliance burden and increasing IRS scrutiny. And that caused ACA to come together. They wrote a report with 50 points that then, but everybody and their pet animal was writing to their representatives in Congress, and they made a big enough stink that the law was amended. There was a new law in 1978 that restored the foreign earned income exclusion and made things better. It wasn't back to where it had been prior to 1976, but it was substantially better. And going through the exercise of looking at these issues, then it is completely amazing to see that of 28 taxation related points, 27 of them are still actual, and the 28th was not a very strong point. So I don't think it was very relevant back then either. But every single point that ACA made in this report is still a major issue. And one of the things that I would like for us to think about is what would be the points that we would add to this list. But the fact is that in a relatively short period of time, people came together and they actually put their voices together and they got a change in the law. They also got this section 611 law passed that we covered. It's in slide. John, do we have the slides available to people? You and I have been going through them together.
Yes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this to an MP3. I'll put it up as a post, and I will include links to the slides in the post.
Okay, and I'm going to put the link in right in the space now. Okay, there it is. So what is interesting is that we can see the law that is in slide 5 that says, equitable treatment of, this is section 611 Public Law 95-426 as amended by section 407 Public Law 9660. And the Congress finds that United States citizens living abroad should be provided fair and equitable treatment by the United States government with regard to taxation, citizenship of progeny, veterans benefits, voting rights, Social Security benefits, other obligations, rights, benefits. United States statutes and regulations should be designed so as not to create competitive disadvantage for individual American citizens living abroad or working in international markets. And there was a need to make a law to say this. That fries me. Then section B says that the President Carter, not later than January 20, 1980, the President shall transmit to the Speaker of the House of Representatives and the Chairman of the Committee on Foreign Relations a report that identifies all United States statutes and regulations that treat United States citizens living abroad differently from United States citizens residing within the United States, et cetera, et cetera. And so, Brad, I agree with you that we could fail and we could end up with, same-o, but we might not fail. And if we all put everything that we have together, and if we look for every possible way to put our voices together, to listen to each other, to understand, go back to the history, see the things that people have done, we just might get this across the goal. And if we don't get it across the goal this time, the exercise of trying everything that we've got to take it forward is going to prepare us better to keep trying, because I find it inspiring that we go back to 1979 and here's ACA resubmitting their report with their original 50 points that went up to 63 points. And including President Carter's response or lack thereof to each of these. And it's true that President Carter's responses are absolutely infuriating, but at least we had a president who was responding. So the fact is that we have a president. We are a bipartisan group. Some of us voted for this president. Some of us did not vote for this president. But whoever we voted for back in November, everybody in this community is hoping that the promise that was made on video will be kept. And if it doesn't get kept in this round of legislation, we're going to keep trying.
Yeah, 100%. Please, if what I said before was interpreted as discouragement, that's not what I meant at all. It was merely a thought experiment of, really, if we actually tried to address each treaty, as President Carter seems to be suggesting, we can solve everything through treaties. I was just questioning really how feasible that is. I certainly agree with everything else you said.
Yeah, and one of the things that we find, we find in President Carter's responses, and we also find in the IRS's responses today, is that would actually be a lot of work for us, so we're just not going to do it.
Well, that's the frustrating part, is like, I agree with their words, and their words are nice, but I also feel like they're putting down those words on paper is part of the reason they can so easily gaslight, is because then they can say, oh, look, we addressed this, we talked about it, we looked at it, we have words, and then 50 years
But
later,
also
here we are.
saying that the tax tree is a solution when you have the savings clause is pure gaslighting.
For sure, 100%.
But the thing is that, okay, so taking care of this is inconvenient, but if we put our voices together, we collectively become quite inconvenient, because we're just asking to be treated ethically. We're asking to be treated in a right way. We're asking them to treat us the way they would want to be treated themselves. And when we put our voices together and when we take care of each other, we have a shot at having them realize, they wouldn't want to be treated the way that they are treating us. And it's worth fighting for. We have a couple more issues. Are people game for it?
Absolutely.
Go for it.
Okay. So we talked about issue 48. And then issue number 49. Okay. Short title, Problems of Overseas Estate Taxation. Summary, the problem: Americans living overseas can have severe difficulties from conflicting claims on the estates of relatives who die in either the United States or abroad. In some cases, wills in one country are held to be invalid in others. And it turns out that estate taxation situation, also particularly for those who are married to a non-resident alien, remain really bad. And the president's reply: the president chose not to address the problem of foreign estate taxation of overseas Americans. So this is something that, and there's basically no warning of this. It seems that magical things are supposed to happen if somebody's married to a non-resident alien, and nobody really knows what it is. So issue number 49 is at least as bad as it was, perhaps worse. John, would you say it's worse now, or would you say it's
Which part of it are you asking about again? Which is worse?
that if you have, for example, a U.S. person married to a non-U.S. person, and then it seems that inheritance and how the estate is managed, and wills, who needs to have a will where?
I think it's worse in the sense that people are now aware of the problem. Okay, plus you've got all these other laws. It's certainly not better. Okay, this huge thing is a real burden on a marriage between a U.S. citizen and a non-citizen living outside the United States.
And the U.S. has the ability via more modern technology to track and attempt to harass people in a way that, sure, it theoretically existed back in Carter's days, but practically speaking, unless you were a high-profile individual, it was pragmatically a different situation.
Well, these issues are raised in the Edelman situation, right? The indictment of this guy. It's easy to make it seem like it's different, because of all the money involved. But at its core, this is a U.S. citizen living outside the United States.
For sure.
They're accusing of hiding assets, in the name of a non-resident alien spouse, right?
Mhm.
So, it definitely raises this as an issue. I think the message here is that these issues were much better understood in 1980 because of the work of ACA, and I think we should give a shout out to them. Than I think any of us really knew, at least at the beginning. Okay, so there's no question about that. Two, it's very, very clear the situation has not gotten better, and in my view, it's gotten far, far worse. Okay. Three, given the combination of those factors, it's really, really very difficult to see this as some kind of a mistake. Okay. Hang on. Sorry, Brent has arrived. Let me ask Brent for a second. And I think this is important, but also, I really appreciate I appreciate you very much, Suzanne, in general, but I want to add, okay, that I very much appreciate the deep dive that you've taken into this today. And I would like to give you a title here, and I hope you will accept this role. Suzanne, I would like to suggest that you become the official citizenship taxation historian.
The historian of the abuse of Americans abroad. There we go.
Welcome, Brent. How are you today? Or was that Brad?
Hi, Brent.
Sorry, Brad. Yeah, sorry.
And
You talking to me? Hello.
yeah, hi, Brent. I
Hi.
mentioned you earlier that what this ACA report does is really give insight into how to address your point of American citizens first. So
Yeah, I've been listening anonymously for a while. I mean, first of all, you've done a fantastic job. Just hats off to you for going through this, and it's something I've never done, and so I've been listening with keen interest because it's just fascinating the parallels, and it just goes to show you how we all think everything is so unique to us, and yet as you guys have said already, nothing's new under the sun. I had a question for you though, Suzanne, which is, in going through any of this, did you ever find well, there's two things that strike me. One is, did you ever find any talk about whether it should not be the foreign earned income exclusion, but when jiggling that it should just be a foreign income exclusion? Because it strikes me that that earned part is such a big part of the problem for Americans abroad.
It's interesting that that did not seem to arise back in this report, and I was looking out for it. You'll see in one of the early slides. From between 1926 and 1962, then foreign earned income was excluded, all of it. And in 1962, some people from Hollywood abused the system, and so there was the Congress went wacko in response. And they first put a threshold. Then 1974, we had the oil crisis. 1975, U.S. citizens got the right to vote from abroad. 1976, there was this, oops, gotcha, we're going to eliminate the foreign earned income exclusion. And then that was when ACA arose from the chaos. And they arose to write this phenomenal report. 1978, then you've got the Tax Act. But 1926 to 1962, it only referred to foreign earned income. And apparently people just didn't really care about foreign unearned income, which is
Well, it's
very
so interesting
surprising.
because that's and going back to those responses from President Carter to the idea that currency fluctuations can be solved with or foreign earned income exclusion or the housing
Right,
allowance difference. I mean, just
right.
nonsense. And it's so interesting to go back to currency controls. Of course, in the 70s, this was like Great Britain. The UK had currency controls. So we're looking at and I keep, as I've said on numerous of these podcasts, I wouldn't be at all surprised if this global trade war doesn't sort itself out if we end up seeing currency controls come back. So it's fascinating how all this reprises itself and how, as nothing is really new. And I guess that was my second point. And I always feel like any more on these spaces, I'm the damper because you're still and I appreciate very much your optimism of the idea. If we look at the power this shows, if we come together and lobby, we actually got something done in the 70s. So you could do it again, of course. And I listen to this and I'm thinking, oh gosh, I cannot believe that 50 years later we're still dealing with this same issue, and it's more depressing than anything else. But the one thing I take, and I still think we haven't solved this as a community, is you see the thread line all the way back to the introduction, even that this is ideological. The fairness falls or fails rather, because at the end of the day, fairness is irrelevant if we're dealing with an ideology, and the ideology is citizens should pay tax. And I feel like we still have yet
Correct.
to come up with a great counter to that, which in a way is I wonder why
Correct.
we haven't succeeded in 50 years.
Well, actually, Brent, you know what? I
Yes.
would like to propose that we devote a separate space to that, and I want you to take the lead role in that. Okay? I think we need to focus on that. Yes?
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I don't
Is
know if I
there
have any answers. I just have questions. I mean, as I know, I think you all, if you've heard my voice on these spaces before, you sort of know that I almost think the only way out is to change the conversation in the method of tax, because I don't know if I can come up with a reason to deal with the ideology. But yeah, I mean, a whole space on that, and
Okay. Shall we
part
do it tomorrow?
informing it.
Shall we do it tomorrow?
Tomorrow's not good for me,
Okay. Monday?
and I want to be there.
Monday? When do you want to do it?
Let me.
You know what? Let's do this. So I tend not to communicate with anybody outside the spaces, but Suzanne does. So Suzanne, can you figure out a date for the next two as quickly as possible, and then you can let me know.
Okay.
I'm fairly flexible this week. Okay, in any case. So
Great. And if people who, and I guess that people who are here who want to come, is there a way? Oh, here we need Jornia, because I understand that if somebody if I'm not following somebody and they send me a message through X, then I
well,
don't
if
get
they
it.
follow me on X, they'll know, right? So it's x.com /
Which is letting me know times that might work, but basically the people I'd like to have Brad, Brent, and Jornio there at the
Sure.
I'm flexible whenever.
okay, that's
Okay,
awesome.
so Suzanne, maybe you can figure that out and let me know. 10 o'clock in the morning is generally good. In Toronto time is generally good for me.
Okay.
And just let me know. But I'd like to do these next couple in fairly rapid succession. Okay, to keep the conversation going.
Yes.
Well, and on this ideology point, I mean, I think to be constructive, what would be useful is, because I think we all know what the ideology is. It's sort of like you're a citizen, you should pay tax too. But going back again to the history, obviously, is relevant, and then trying to come up with some arguments as to why you're still part of the community. Well, some sort of rationale for why citizenship alone is the wrong measure, or maybe what Suzanne was suggesting 2 months ago, where there's some sort of solidarity duty or something that you have to pay. But just there is a simplification. But
Well, I
I
think
feel
a
like that's what's
passport
missing.
fee. I think it's just a straight passport renewal fee. Would do most of this. I mean, that's my view. But I also want to do a step.
But
Go ahead.
but philosophically, it's really coming down to really whether there should even be parity between domestic and foreign people. Like that's the actual issue. If we were able to be on parity with domestic people, then there wouldn't be a conversation, because there's no requirement to pay taxes to be a U.S. citizen for domestic people.
Right.
So
Okay. All right. So good. Let me just say, Suzanne, are we finished with what you wanted to go through today?
There was one additional issue.
Let's do that, okay, and then we'll come back to this. Okay. So.
Okay. This is under additional tax problems for overseas Americans. This is something that ACA added in report 2 that was not in report 1. So we don't have a president's response. All the other points that were raised were already raised in report 1. But they point out, and this is on slide 25, the first problem comes from the U.S. policy of taxing overseas unearned income. So, Brent, this gets to your question. The United States is the only major country of the free world that taxes the overseas unearned income of its overseas citizens. Many in the United States feel that this is perfectly proper, yet those who suffer severe hardship from this tax practice are those who have worked to accumulate a nest egg for retirement. Overseas retirees living mainly on the fruit of such capital accumulation are treated much worse under present U.S. law than those earning an income abroad. Sections 911 or 913 give some relief from U.S. taxes for those abroad by recognizing extraordinary overseas cost of living, housing, etc. There are no similar provisions giving any tax relief for unearned income. The impact of this unfortunate tax practice of the United States is so severe in some cases that overseas Americans who are about to retire must seriously consider abandoning their U.S. citizenship and acquiring another nationality merely to be able to survive economically during their last years of life. So one thing I have to say about this, like I've been preparing these slides, and John, thank you for asking me to do this, because otherwise I had done a casual read going, wow, this is really amazing. But going through this to walk the group through really brings it to life. It's quite amazing.
It does.
And reading this slide out loud, Brent said, so what do they say? And I'm like, well, I don't think they say so much. And guess what? I'm wrong. I just demonstrated that I had prepared the slide, but so we have a serious issue here. So we have been going, oh my goodness, we've been going for, I thought this was going to be like a 1 hour space. And we've been going for 2 hours and 36 minutes.
Yeah, we really should wrap this up.
I have to wrap this up. So, John, you want me to wrap this up?
I would appreciate that.
Okay. You said this was the tradition. So today I'm happy to do that. So what we have is, with deep gratitude, we recognize the incredible job that ACA did in the face of a very unfair treatment of U.S. expats. And it has been a wonderful and inspiring experience to go through their text. It inspires me to want to do the same, continue doing the same, build on what they've done. Also encourage all of us to do everything that we can to build bridges between each other. And then the other thing is, yes, this is going to be tough. And yes, there are moments like, Brent, you said that, you look at this and you're like, oh my goodness. It's kind of discouraging. It's like so much. And I had the same reaction reading this. They did all of this and we're still here. But this is an endurance exercise. We just need to keep going. And eventually things are going to go in a better direction. One thing which I think really helps us is technology. The fact that we can come together like this, have this type of communication, get people, it really helps in getting people on the same page. But then technology is also extremely useful for digesting previously undigestible information. So the fact that we can use spreadsheets, like I encourage people to explore the spreadsheet that has the list of the issues, and then I filtered it on the ones that are related to taxation, and then I filtered out the one that I call not current, and we see that 27 of 28 issues related to taxation are important. And then what are the issues? If we're standing on the shoulders of giants, what are the issues that we need to add to this list to be able to fix this? And then if we have one list, and if everybody can agree on that one list, then we just keep going forward with our list until things happen.
All right.
Does that
Sounds very, very good. Well, I'd asked you earlier if you regarded this as a moral issue, and I think that, particularly in terms of the commitment, the time this takes, we probably should end with a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King that you all no doubt heard, which is, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Yes?
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
Well said.
Well, thank you, everybody. And I look forward to hearing from you ASAP on a convenient time for our next space, which will be largely led, I hope, by Brent. Okay.
Sounds great.
Yes,
Would not miss it for anything.
all right.
And Brent, can you send me a couple of times that work for you, or a couple of days that work for you at John's time?
Yes, I will.
Perfect. Awesome.
Wonderful.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for hanging out, all this time, and looking forward to building on this.
Yeah, it's
Well,
been
thank
good.
you again for all your work.
And John, you're amazing at the way that you're kind of bringing us all together and keeping us deeply involved.
Well, this is actually the easiest of the things I've been doing over the years. You just have to sit in the chair to do this. This is cool. All right. See you next time,
Okay, bye
everybody. Bye.
everybody. Thanks a lot.